Next stop everywhere.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Charles Skaggs, back in the TARDIS once again, ready to talk some Doctor Who, as always, because, hey, Doctor Who podcast, go figure. And no Jesse this week, no Karen this week, but fortunately we have special guest companion and Next Stop Everywhere listener, John Takacs. I hope I pronounced that right.
Yep, you did it perfectly. That's
Excellent.
Great.
Hi, John. Welcome to Next Stop Everywhere.
It's a pleasure to be here. I love talking about Doctor Who to anyone who wants to listen.
You come to the right place because we will obviously, even with the show off, we're going to talk some Doctor Who, and we're going to talk a really good one, in my opinion, this week, and also yours, because this was suggested by you.
My personal favorite.
Episode 136 here, we're going to talk The Seeds of Doom. And this, as a little preface, is that this was the very first story that I was exposed to as a Doctor Who fan way, way back in the day, back in the 80s. And when I was just all of maybe 14 years old, I was bored. I was looking for something to watch because even though we had cable, there still wasn't as many channels as there are today. And so we're just kind of flipping around the dial looking for something to watch, and came across this. I wasn't quite sure what it was, and it was a little, like I was seeing images, like this was like late at night, as it was aired on my local PBS station, WVIZ out of Cleveland, and it was interesting because this story, it had it was set apparently in Antarctica, and I wasn't sure, and then I saw this guy who was being transformed somehow into like some weird plant creature, and I was just like, what is up with this? And I had no clue about any of these characters. I had no clue what was going on, but it was just so disturbing, and for whatever reason it didn't quite hook me that until the Keeper of Traken. But this stuck in my head, and probably is one of the reasons this disturbing story is one of the reasons why I'm probably such a Doctor Who fan today. Mm-hmm. So how about you, John? Now you've mentioned this as your favorite, and I want to get your thoughts. I want to get your background on Doctor Who first, foremost.
Like you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, just like you, I grew up watching it on Channel 25. I'm originally from the Cleveland area. I live in Massillon now, but right. Up in the Cleveland area, we had Channel 25, and we also had 45 and 49. So there were two different PBS stations that we could watch Doctor Who on. Right. My first Doctor Who wasn't even the TV series. It was actually the Daleks' Invasion of Earth 2150 AD movie with Peter Cushing.
Nice.
I saw that on the Big Chuck and Little John show.
I'm a huge Big Chuck and Little John fan, so I'm right there with you.
They had they had it on, and it was something I'd never seen before, but they had the little make your own paper Daleks sitting on their coffee table,
right.
And they said, you know what, watch this movie, and if you like it and you want to get these little Daleks, we'll give you the address. You send a self-addressed stamped envelope to. And, of course, it's at the very end of the movie, right. Which was great because I got a chance to watch it. If the first movie was probably the one that I saw first, I might not have stayed with it, but I have a special special place in my heart for that particular film.
Yeah, because that story was basically a movie version of the Dalek invasion of Earth, which was like
Right.
the 10th story ever of Doctor Who, way back in the William Hartnell era. Because they adapted the second story, the Daleks, for the first Peter Cushing movie. And then the second one, Daleks Invasion of Earth, which is, I totally agree, is a much better movie. And it also features Bernard Cribbins, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was in there.
Who later, of course, became Wilf on Doctor Who during the David Tennant era. So, all those years later, it was pretty cool. So that was that was your first exposure.
That was my first exposure. I had gone to the local comic book store, and I'd seen the Target novels, but I never knew anything about the show until then.
Right.
And a few weeks later, I was paging through the Sun newspaper's TV guide. I see Doctor Who on Channel 25. I'm thinking to myself, okay, I like these Daleks. I'm going to watch them again. Turn it on, and it's episode 1 of Mask of Mandragora.
Ooh, that's a good one.
I was like, okay, this is completely different from what I watched, but I watched it all the way through, and I was hooked.
Okay, so essentially, Mask was the one that hooked you.
Yeah, Mask was it was the first actual TV episode I had watched.
Right. Okay, all right. So after watching the second Peter Cushing movie, you thought, okay, that's cool, and then when you looked for more Doctor Who, that's what hooked you, was Mask of Mandragora.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
And just the dynamic between Tom and Liz, it was perfect.
Exactly. Yeah, and obviously we get a great example of that here in this story because, Tom Baker and Elisabeth Sladen are just magic together. One of the best Doctor companion pairings in my mind. And obviously Sarah Jane is, for the most part, not pretty widely considered to be everybody's favorite companion for the most part.
For the most part.
I mean, obviously you've got exceptions. You got a lot of people who love Ace or Jamie or obviously Rose or Donna or somebody. But by and large, a lot of people just predominantly love Sarah Jane. So okay, that's great. And so obviously you stuck with that, and that was pretty much it. You're just watching from that point on.
Stuck with it, and eventually got a little miniature fan club going at the local library,
right.
And a lot of those people that went there, they're still good friends of mine, and I'm actually the founding member of the Ohio Type 40 Facebook Doctor Who page.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you can plug that later in our show so that everybody can find you, because we'll feel free to shamelessly plug here, because that's what we do. So, and you were kind enough to come on and help us out. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Okay, so let's start talking this story here. So, just to give a general overview of this, it was written by Robert Banks Stewart, the writer of Terror of the Zygons back in the day, the very first Zygon story, and directed by Douglas Camfield. And apparently this was his last story that he directed for Doctor Who. And it was the 6th serial of season 13 that aired in 1976. So basically almost like 43 years later, here we are. And the story still kind of creeps me out a little bit.
It does. And just the whole idea of it.
Yeah, and I totally recommend, I don't know about anybody else, but I recommend watching this really late at night in your darkened living room. And especially during the Antarctica scenes, it'll really creep you out, I think.
Yeah, if you like the movies based off The Thing, this is right up your alley.
Exactly. This is because this story is obviously inspired by The Thing. Now the 1980s John Carpenter version, of course, hadn't happened yet, so this was essentially referencing the original from the 50s.
The Thing from Another World. Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And let's see. So. A little bit of trivia I want to run down is that this story was the Doctor's final major involvement with UNIT until Battlefield, way ahead in season 26 in 1989. So obviously we don't get the Brigadier or Benton in this story.
Yeah, it wasn't a great send-off for him.
No, it wasn't, because essentially they explained that they didn't feel that there was enough to do for UNIT to bother with getting Nicholas Courtney or John Levine. So they just say that, well, the Brigadier's in Geneva. So it's kind of an anticlimactic send-off for UNIT here, at least until 1989.
Right.
But yeah, this is the first UNIT story that we don't have the Brigadier or Benton. So I guess one good thing, at least, it shows you that, hey, there's other officers at UNIT, which is nice. All right. So I do have some cast I want to go through, the special guest cast of the week. And first and foremost, obviously, Tony Beckley as the rather disturbed Harrison Chase.
Yeah, he's creepy.
He is creepy. He's essentially like this Bond, like sort of a Bond villain, but he's really unhinged. Mm-hmm. And he's obviously like he loves plants more than people, a little too much, as it turns out. And noticed that he was in a couple of interesting things. He was in episode of The Saint, which was the Roger Moore series, which obviously was very big in Britain. And he was in the movie The Revenge of the Pink Panther with Peter Sellers. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We had John Challis as Scorby, who is a real piece of work in this story.
Oh, he's a great villain.
Yeah. And he's got a great villainous look to him. All scowly and with his evil Spock goatee going. He played the fifth incarnation of Drax, who was brought back for the Big Finish audios. He was in a Tom Baker Big Finish audio called "The Trouble with Drax," and he actually returns all these years later to play one of the incarnations of Drax, which I thought was kind of cool. So very cool. Obviously, Scorby meets his end in this story, so he probably couldn't play Scorby again. But,
right.
But it's great that he still connected with Doctor Who all those decades later. We had Mark Jones, who played Arnold Keeler, and of course was the Krynoid voice later on after he transforms.
Right.
Interestingly, he was in the movie The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, I saw that.
As Commander Nemeth, an Imperial officer. So if you probably pause and look really, really hard, you'll probably find him.
Yeah, it's like a 5-second thing right by the bounty hunter scene.
Oh, okay. You know exactly where he is. That's awesome.
Yeah, right before you see him look up and you see Bosk's toes like
okay, that's where he is?
Yeah.
All right,
yeah,
awesome.
That's where he is, yeah.
I'm glad you found that. That's awesome. See, this is why we have you here. This is great because you're covering for my ineptitude here. All right, Hubert Reeves, who plays John Stevenson. He was in a couple of previous Doctor Who stories. He played the chief engineer in Fury from the Deep, a Patrick Troughton story, and Captain Ransom, more notably, in Patrick Troughton's final story, The War Games. So he's got a little bit of a Doctor Who background. Seymour Green, who played Hargreaves, returns about a decade later to play the Chamberlain in Colin Baker's first story, The Twin Dilemma. And he's basically another toady-like character in that one as well.
Right.
And then
he's all decked out in makeup.
Exactly. Yeah, you can't really recognize him because he has that kind of silverish bird face going.
Right, yeah, it's just through the voice.
Exactly. Ian Fairbairn played Dr. Chester in the story. He was in several Doctor Who stories. He played Questa in the Patrick Troughton story, The Macra Terror, which is being brought back here soon because of animation to fill in with the missing episodes. So that's awesome. Mark Gregory, who was in The Invasion, and that's a great story, one of Patrick Troughton's great stories, where he battles the Cybermen. And he also played a character named John Bromley in Inferno, the John Pertwee story we talked about here a few weeks ago.
Right.
So, pretty cool. So, that's our guest cast I want to run down. And then without any further ado, then we'll just dive right into our main topics, if that's okay, unless you had
Sounds good.
anything else you want to add before we move on.
Well, I just want to add with the production crew. You mentioned Robert Banks Stewart was the writer. He wrote the first story of that season, the last story of that season, and season 13 is regarded by a lot of fans as the Gothic horror era.
Right.
A little bit with season 14, but mainly 13. And the production crew, and of course you got Philip Hinchcliffe, he's one of my favorite producers of all time with the show. Douglas Camfield, last gig at directing,
right.
And the story goes that he actually stopped at a church with his wife and went in there and told the priest, "Hey, this is my last Doctor Who I'm doing. I'm telling you in front of her," and that was it. Of course, Graham Harper, production assistant way back then.
Yep, one of the best Doctor Who directors ever. Is the director of my favorite story, The Caves of Androzani.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
So you've got a powerhouse team right there.
Yeah, that was great.
So it's just you're just waiting for great things to happen with that one.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about this story so much is that it's so beautifully shot. It's very atmospheric. Like I said, was talking about especially the Antarctica scenes. Where you have a base under siege, and it's at night, and there's all this darkness, and you've got this monster that could be anywhere, and it's great. I love it.
And the model shots of the base, beautiful even to this day.
Right.
And those are all just vacuum formed buildings. I'm a scale model builder myself, so it's like when I see stuff like that, I'm just geeking out.
Yeah, or even at the end of the episode where you get to see the exteriors of Harrison Chase's mansion estate.
Mm-hmm.
For 1976, those were really good, especially on BBC TV.
Right.
And it's pretty impressive model work, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right, so let's dive into our first topic, the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane. So I want to talk about these two characters, obviously because they're the leads of the show, and we have the Doctor. The way he gets involved in the story is that he essentially goes to the World Ecology Bureau, where he gets shown some photographs of a pod at the urging of Sir Colin Thackeray. And the Doctor, of course, says, "Well, that's extraterrestrial," and then goes to tell this guy Dunbar to tell the expedition, like, "Hey, don't touch anything until I get there." And
first big mistake.
And we're off to the races because, of course, yes, they're going to touch it.
Yeah, you have to touch it.
They have to touch it. So we're off to Antarctica, and they dig this stuff out. So I want to get your thoughts on Tom Baker and Sarah Jane in this adventure.
Well, this one, I've always told friends of mine that also Doctor Who fans, the Doctor seems so much more alien in this episode, in the story. He's more like, you have to help yourselves. He's not there just to solve their problems. He'll help them along the way, but he's not the magic. I just push this button and it's all taken care of. Right. He's letting them know, okay, this is dangerous. You got yourself into this, and you need to find a way to get yourself out. He's not the happy-go-lucky Doctor that's just going to run in and save the day.
No, and this portrayal is so different, I think, from a lot of, especially early Tom Baker stories. He's running around, he's punching people left and right in this story. And he, even though he doesn't use a gun, he's holding a gun.
Right. It's much more violent than you've ever seen Tom Baker before.
Exactly. And he's very snippy. Now, obviously, Tom could be a little snippy sometimes, especially as the Doctor. But here, he's very brutal in his approach in this story, and it's kind of a little unsettling at first.
I think a lot of that has to do with Robert Banks Stewart, because if you look at Terror of the Zygons,
right,
he's like that in that story as well.
Yeah, so it's just probably
not so much, but
it's not so much Tom as it is. Yeah, you're right, exactly. It's Robert Banks Stewart, how he views the Fourth Doctor, essentially. Obviously, much more proactive. Yeah, much more alien, and much more, I want to say, distant. Removed from humanity.
Right.
In this one, he's not. He does crack a lot of jokes, and I'm sure that a lot of that was Tom ad-libbing, because as he was prone to do. Mm-hmm. But yeah, for a lot of the story, he's very intense in this story.
Very serious, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And now obviously it helps to heighten the tension, but mm-hmm. it just does seem a little unusual for him. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And with Sarah being her second season with him,
right,
she's really coming into her own.
Right.
And first season is just more or less just to get the characters to know each other.
Right. They were kind of like feeling each other out in season 12.
Right.
Here,
season 13, she's there.
Yeah, basically that partnership has clicked totally. Mm-hmm. And they banter so well. They've got great chemistry. Which comes through in basically every story in this season. And Sarah, she does what she does. She's right there in the middle of things, trying to help the doctor out. A little bit of her reporter-like curiosity gets the better of her at times, but hey, that's what makes for a great doctor companion, is that their tendency to get into trouble, so that the doctor can rescue them.
It's part of the job description.
Or as one of the cases, Sarah actually rescues the doctor from the
chipper.
The chipper, yeah, essentially, yes. The machine, the compost machine.
Right.
And so in this one, it's actually kind of rare that Sarah actually saves the doctor for once. Mm-hmm. And that was a kind of a nice change of pace. But the doctor's butting heads with a lot of people in this story.
Yes, he is.
Especially Scorby, mm-hmm. who kind of butts heads a lot with Sarah Jane as well, because Scorby is so abusive, and we'll talk about Scorby here in our second topic. But mm-hmm. But I like the fact that the doctor, of course, is not going to just roll over for what Scorby wants.
Right.
And he kind of challenges him, while Sarah, interestingly, tries to approach him from the trying to make him more compassionate to what's going on, mm-hmm. which I thought was an interesting approach. And it kind of works a little bit, but ultimately he's this really craven, bully that ultimately panics so much. And then, like I said, we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see what else here. So, anything that struck you about the doctor and Sarah in this story that was pretty notable?
Sarah was more or less trying to tell him, okay, you need to be a little bit more compassionate. And he's just like, okay, well, he's going to die. And he's turning into, his blood's basically turning into vegetable soup.
Yeah.
So there's nothing left that we can do about him.
You're talking about Keeler, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, the first guy? Yeah. Name escapes me off the top of my head right now, but Winlet, that's right.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, something's got to be done. So.
Yeah, they're like, what do we do? Like, I can't fix you. Mm-hmm. And then I thought there was kind of an interesting moment with Keeler later on, where Sarah Jane, she comes to his room where he's being kept, and Keeler is pleading with her. Yeah. And she's just like, he's asking her like, well, hey, lift me out of these restraints so we can get out of here so I can go to a doctor. And she's kind of looking at him going, dude, I'm not sure about that. Right. Maybe not a good idea.
By that time she knows that there's nothing she can do or anybody can do for him.
Right, because obviously she'd seen Winlet and what it did to him. Mm-hmm. So, and then just, obviously, you've got Keeler just being so outraged by that, which is mm-hmm. probably one of the things that kind of tips him over finally to becoming a full monster, a crinoid. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was interesting that Sarah kind of just hangs back and isn't as like, look, well, I'm not sure what we can do for you here, so bye. See you later.
She's almost acting like the doctor in that sense.
Essentially, yeah. That's
with this story, yeah.
Yeah, there's obviously it's beyond her control, so she probably felt
mm-hmm.
like, well, I'll go talk to somebody about it, and we'll see what happens. I thought it was interesting. All right.
Plus the fact that it could have been her.
Exactly. Now that was one of the interesting things. Is so yeah that Keeler said, this could have been you.
Hmm.
And so he's like, yeah, you might want to, be a little bit more appreciative, I
Hmm.
guess. But by the same token, he was right there helping Scorby and Chase break open that pod and just to see what would happen.
Hmm.
So I'm guessing Sarah wasn't exactly overly too sympathetic toward his plight because of
Right.
that. Yeah, he kind of got what was coming to him a little bit.
Hmm.
All right. Anything else about these two characters before we move on?
What the fact that throughout the story you see that he's not the violent type.
Right.
He's more of the scientific. He wants to see what's going on, and he doesn't he doesn't like how everything's going on, but there's no way he can stop it.
Right. The doctor, you mean? Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And let's see. Well, we talked about how he's trying to get some help from Unit, but of course the Brigadier's not around.
Hmm.
And he does what he can to basically kind of buy time until Unit gets its act together and gets a hold of the Royal Air Force to end up saving the day at the end of the episode.
Right.
So it's not really the doctor does anything to stop the Krynoid. It's just more like he tries to keep everybody alive, or at least all the people he cares about alive, until the RAF can come in and blow stuff up.
Right, because the unit laser didn't work on it. So.
Exactly. So it's like, okay, well, let's try air to surface missiles and
Mm-hmm.
see how that goes. All right. Let's move on to topic number 2. And since we were talking about Keeler, let's talk about Keeler and also Harrison Chase and Scorby. So Harrison Chase, obviously, our big bad of the episode, not counting the Krynoid, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And who's essentially, like we talked about, a kind of a James Bond-like villain, but he's really over the edge. He really goes off the deep end in the final episode.
Right.
And it's kind of fascinating to watch. What'd you think of this?
Right off the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, right off the top. I mean, you can tell he's this billionaire philanthropist that all he cares about is his plants and plant life. Even taking jabs in the beginning and saying, okay, well, what was your bureau doing about bonsai, the mutilation of Japanese shrubs?
Right.
And towards the end, he is so enamored with the Krynoid that he becomes possessed by it, and he's out there taking pictures while it's strangling people.
Yeah,
I thought it's fantastic.
Yeah, it was a very intriguing villain. I thought you had like you said, Chase was just so wrapped up in his own obsession in the story. Like we got the first real hints of it when he's trying to after Keeler gets stung, he has no interest in trying to help Keeler. Zero.
Right.
He's just like, okay, I want to see what happens when the Krynoid stings human flesh.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see what happens to that person. First, he wants to do it to Sarah, but that doesn't work out because of the doctor busting through the roof and giving Sarah a moment to kind of get away from the Krynoid while Keeler stumbles and unfortunately has his sleeves rolled up.
Mm-hmm.
Which kind of had to tip you off that, hey, something was going to happen to that guy.
Right.
So he gets stung, and then from that point on, Chase is just like, okay, like, this is awesome. Like, he's half tempted to, like, okay, I'm going to get a bowl of popcorn. I'm going to sit here and just watch this happen.
Yeah, he just wants to see the transformation and.
Yeah,
and even before the pot opened,
yeah,
he's feeding it nitrogen, giving it UV rays, and
right.
He wants to do as much as he can to see this thing open up.
Like, and the doctor, once he finds this out, is like, you haven't been feeding that thing, have you? And Chase is just like, well, yeah, why not?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's a superior form of life,
right?
And so once Keeler gets stung, Keeler is just begging for help. He gets brought to his room, and he's going through this metamorphosis is really going really quickly, probably because of Chase feeding that thing all the nutrients and whatnot, and the UV rays. But so yeah, and Chase is just adamant. Is like, no, we're not going to take you to the doctor. You're good here.
Yeah, even the butler says to him, he says, "Well, I'm sure Mr. Chase he'll take care of it for you."
Yeah, Hargreaves, his butler,
Hmm.
who just goes along apparently with whatever crazy. Now you have to figure, well, he's probably been working for this guy for years. He's
Right.
probably seen a lot of strange stuff.
Hmm.
But for whatever reason, he now just rolls right along with it. Like, okay, whatever you want, boss. Whatever you want, Mr. Chase. I'll do it. You
Hey,
know.
you're paying my salary,
Exactly.
so that's
Exactly. Um, so we have Scorby, meanwhile, essentially acting as Chase's major henchman, and
head of security.
whatever, is basically his guy to get things done.
Hmm.
Chase sends Scorby at first to Antarctica, where basically to bring back both pods. He's only able to bring back one,
Hmm.
and because the first one infects with a Windlet.
Windlet, yeah.
And so Windlet gets destroyed when the base blows up. But Scorby brings back the pod, and this is after he was just willing to do just about anything to achieve his goal. He's willing to kill the Doctor and Sarah. Has no qualms about it whatsoever.
Yeah, he could pull the trigger just like that if he wanted to.
And just a very cold, calculating figure.
Hmm.
And we don't
Pretty much
really,
the guy the villain you love to hate.
right. And we don't get much of a backstory for him until late in the story, very late,
Right.
where he talks about like, well, hey, I never had anybody really to depend on. I had to depend on myself.
Hmm.
And his whole thing is just like, I do what it takes to survive, and, I don't need anybody. So therefore, I feel no connection to anybody.
Right, and that's happening at the worst moment possible when the Krynoid's attacking the house, and that's when he gets scared and just opens up. So yeah, I thought that was great.
And that
great
was
spot in the story.
that was a great moment where essentially Scorby, who was basically a bully throughout all this story, he's being horrible to people throughout the entire story.
Hmm.
Ultimately, he panics and freaks the hell out.
Yeah.
And so much so that even though you've got all these vines out there, like going at the house, he still piles right outside and goes diving through all these vines. He's scrambling, only to face plant in the pond or whatever. And ultimately, it's there that this big vine trap is waiting to
Just comes up and
goes like
right
basically
over him.
like Venus flytraps him and
Right.
and drags him under, and he gets his just desserts.
Hmm.
So
He had to do that twice. That was the second take that they used when they were filming it.
So when you're watching this, are you very satisfied to watch Scorby get his in the end?
Yes and no. I think he would have made a great returning character. Like if he would have gotten away and just reappeared in another story years down the line or seasons down the line.
Right.
But yeah, as like the evil henchman, I thought he was perfect for it.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things because this was in the classic era. Is that if this was made in the modern era, they probably would have kept Scorby alive to come back at some point.
Yeah. I mean, he could have been the Linton of that era.
Yes, exactly. That's a great comparison. So yeah, referring of course to Linton from the Resurrection of the Daleks and Revelation of the Daleks, or I'm sorry, Attack of the Cybermen. I'm sorry, you're right. Yes, thank you for correcting me. But yeah, so just a very menacing character and with a lot of potential that sadly wasn't realized beyond this story. But he did share some really interesting scenes with Sarah Jane as she's trying to kind of keep him under control. And there was that great moment. There was one great moment where he's telling her it's basically Scorby and Sarah Jane at this point. The Doctor is elsewhere, and units, kind of outside doing their thing. So they're trapped in the house, and Scorby tells her, "Look, I'm all you've got. So you better be nice to me."
Mm-hmm.
And Sarah's just kind of like going along with it like, sure, whatever you say. Although obviously secretly going like, look, at the first opportunity, we need to do something about you.
Yeah, just a means to an end.
Yeah, exactly. But Keeler obviously ultimately mutates into becoming the full crinoid, and we'll talk about that here in our third topic. So,
Hmm.
anything else about this story, about these characters, before we move
No,
on?
I thought it was a great group.
Yeah,
Just a nice little comparison to like the, well, not comparison, but a counter to the Doctor and Sarah,
right.
and their group with Amelia Ducar, and uh, uh, you got the World Ecology Bureau, and then here's the baddies that they have to take care of.
Essentially, yeah. And that was kind of an interesting scene when with Chase and Ducar, where or excuse me, Ducat,
Ducat, yeah, that's
Ducat,
right.
and she where she makes him like her whole thing is she tries to get some information about what's going on in the house. So she
Hmm.
uses the excuse of like, "Hey, uh, you never paid me for that painting I did for you. Like, where's my money?"
Hmm.
And so she goes in there. She kind of negotiates like about £1,000,
Yeah.
and at first he's like not wanting to give her anything, and then Scorby kind of comes along and it's like, well, maybe you want to kind of get rid of her at this point because we've got some
Hmm.
other things going on.
Right.
So he's like,
Just to
okay,
keep them on track.
right. So yeah, kind of it's like focus, boss, focus. We got this thing going
Hmm.
on. So he signs over the check, and she takes it, gets out of there. But she goes into the limousine and she's talking. I think it was to Sir Colin. Was it Sir Colin
Hmm.
in the car?
Yeah.
And Dunbar,
Right.
who's also in there. And Dunbar seems to think that, well, hey, um, I can go in there and kind of take care of this, which is ultimately his end.
Right.
Yeah, he meets his fate.
Yeah, he's basically telling them, "Look, I've been in there before." And he's without saying it, he's telling them that, yeah, I was the mole.
Right. Yeah, that is very interesting. But yeah, great performance, I thought, by Tony Beckley as Harrison Chase.
Hmm.
Really compelling villain, and I'd always love to see these just fanatically obsessed Doctor Who villains.
Oh yeah,
That's great.
yeah. They bring so much to the story.
They do. All right. Let's move on. If you don't have anything else, we'll move on to topic number 3.
Hmm.
And that, of course, is the crinoids. So we're kind of introduced early on because obviously we're in Antarctica, and where we have these British scientists, Charles Winlet, no relation, and Derek Moberly, who discover a pod buried in the permafrost. So naturally, of course, they take it back to their camp instead of leaving it the hell alone.
Hmm.
And we have John Stevenson, the base botanist, identifies it as vegetable-based, of course. And he's like, well, this thing's probably been buried in the ice for 20,000 years. So, of course, the big question is, well, how did it get there 20,000 years ago? We don't really get an
Right.
explanation for that. And obviously they took some photographs and faxed them, presumably, for what lack of a better term, telexed them. And this obviously tips off the World Ecology Bureau, who basically gets with the doctor somehow. And the doctor gets there, and they notice that, well, hey, Stevenson notices that the pod's getting larger, and he feels that, he feels that it's absorbing ultraviolet radiation. So you would think they're not sure what would happen from the pod at this point, but they keep allowing it to have ultraviolet radiation.
And there seems to be a time where he seems a little possessed by it as well.
Right, because
He's like, it's alive. I can
he's a
feel it.
scientist, so yeah, it's almost exactly. It's almost like a precursor with Chase with the second pod.
Exactly.
You're exactly right. And so essentially, Chase gets tipped off about the pod, and of course sends his men, Scorby and Keeler, to get it.
Hmm.
And
Through Dunbar.
exactly through Dunbar. So Dunbar is not exactly innocent in this. of course, the first pod opens, stings Winlet. We talked about that. He's covered with these green hives, and this is when this Doctor and Sarah show up, and they find that it's like his face and his body. So essentially, we get this really cool body horror, and that's probably one of the things that like first got my attention back in the day. Was just like I'd never seen anything like this. This guy turning into this plant monster,
right?
And it's just this. It was a very powerful image back then. And probably one of the things that just stuck with me. But apparently his blood has no blood platelets. It's all schizophytes, as we're told.
Right.
And the Doctor essentially tells Sarah at this point that Winlet is turning into a crinoid, which he describes as a galactic weed that settles on planets and eats animal life. So it's a plant, but it's a carnivorous plant.
Right.
Which is not a good sign, especially if you've watched a Doctor Who story before. Once or twice. And so wacky chaos ensues, and they end up having to blow up, of course, the base. And we talked about, once the second pod is brought back to Chase, he gets all Mr. Obsessive, Keeler gets turned into the crinoid, and then becomes this huge, ginormous monster that essentially becomes larger than Chase's estate. So it's almost like it turns into kind of like almost like a big sort of like a kaiju monster movie almost at this point.
Right. Yeah, I think the Doctor referred to it as it could get as large as St. Paul's Cathedral, maybe even larger. Right.
And having seen St. Paul's Cathedral in person, that's pretty big.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah, I've been there. I've seen it.
So that's a good sized thing.
St. Paul's Cathedral get larger.
St. Paul's Cathedral, of course, becoming famous for, of course, the Cybermen. But
right.
Yeah.
But not only is the crinoid going to get larger, it's going to spout out more pods and shoot those as far as it can.
And that's the real big threat. Is like, okay, right now it's just one big crinoid. But it could obviously set off spores and reproduce, and there could be more of these things that consume the planet.
Right.
So that's the big threat, is to take out this one before the threat spreads. And so it's just, and then now the crinoid is depicted with a lot of puppetry. A lot of tentacles. Probably with crewmen holding, waving a thing around off screen.
Right. In the final form, yeah.
Right, exactly. As they kind of bust through windows, and you've got a lot of vines that were shown, like crashing through windows and whatnot toward the end. As this crinoid, it's not, the fact that it could reproduce, that's one threat. But we find out that the crinoid can also take over other plants and turn them into weapons as well. And we find that out, that kind of unit talks about it. That and that's one of the things that the Doctor uses. There's this report of people that have been killed by the plant life within just a mile around Chase's estate.
Radius, right?
Yes, right. So the unit head guy, I forget his name. What's his name? Shoot.
The not brigadier.
Yeah, the not brigadier. Yes, I want to say Sergeant Henderson, but it's not Sergeant Henderson. It's the other guy.
Henderson was the other
Beresford.
guard. That's right.
Yeah, Beresford. So Beresford, he's just like, well, I'm not sure about this. I'm not sure if we should be getting involved in this. I'm not sure it's my jurisdiction here. And the Doctor goes, well, why don't Sir Colin, why don't you read this about this person that died because of plants, and then Beresford, why don't you read this about this person who died because of plants? So maybe we should do something about this.
All within a mile of the Chase estate, yeah.
Exactly. So finally convinced, unit gets off his ass and gets there, and tries to, obviously their first reaction is to shoot rifles at it, which of course never does anything. So I don't know why they even bother with rifles at this point.
Right.
I guess it's that whole military mindset that just never lets go of the rifles. They try a laser gun. That doesn't work. So at least they tried something a little different. But probably because they have no replacement scientific advisor at this point,
right,
to help them figure out what to do about this thing. Probably budget cuts, and they ultimately have to call in the Royal Air Force, which basically does like a sighting run, and then they finally do a bombing run, and fire 3 missiles that apparently take out the crinoid and also the estate in the process.
Yeah.
In a pretty cool, especially for again 70s BBC television, pretty cool destruction shot.
Yeah, it was a great model shot. The stop motion animation was really good. Still holds up to this day, and it reminds you of a lot of the old Harryhausen stuff.
Oh yeah,
especially with the way the tentacles are moving throughout the like over the roof tiles and everything.
Right.
Yeah, it still looks great.
Yeah, you can't beat that old kind of 70s 60s stop motion animation. And of course Ray Harryhausen was a king of that.
Yep.
And so that was cool. All right. Anything else about the crinoid do you want to talk about?
Well, I love how in the human form they essentially reused the costume from the Axons. They just painted it green.
Right, exactly.
And there's some scenes where when he's attacking in the Antarctic base, you could see a little bit of the orange peeking through that they didn't cover completely. But
right.
Yeah, it's still a great monster. It's
and then obviously
and the fact that
the Axons were, of course, from the claws of Axos back in the John Pertwee era. But a few seasons later, they recycled the monster because, hey, we've got the suits, and we could probably need to save the budget, so just spray paint
a lick of green paint on it. Yeah, it fit the bill.
Yeah.
So,
and it worked out
and just the fact that just an alien intelligence like that could control plants.
Right.
I have wood areas behind my house, and it's like, okay, well, there's a crinoid back there. I'm not cutting grass because it's going to cut me back.
Yeah.
That's always been one of my favorites.
And I've always wanted to kind of see the crinoids return on television. It seems like a lost opportunity. You think this would be a great Doctor Who monster to bring back?
Yeah.
In the modern era, with obviously better special effects.
And it doesn't even have to be on Earth.
Right, exactly. You can, wherever we need to maybe find out where the crinoids come from. There's an idea, and so hopefully at some point they'll bring the crinoids back. But until then, if you want to hear more about the crinoids, there's a great Big Finish audio called Hot House, which I recommend.
Yep.
And I believe it's an 8th Doctor story.
8th Doctor and Lucy Miller.
So there you can't go wrong, because that's one of my favorite Big Finish pairings is the 8th Doctor and Lucy Miller. So
Lucy Bleeding Miller,
exactly. So if you want to check out the crinoids again, go check out Hot House. I recommend that. It's always fun.
Yeah, there's a couple audios from BBV as well, but those were never really taken well by the fans.
Yeah.
One was the root of all evil, and then the other one was the Green Man. But I've said before with the BBV stuff, sometimes the best that you hear or see is the stuff that you don't watch.
Interesting. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's almost kind of because it leaves it up to the imagination. So your brain kind of fills in the gaps, and that's one of the real advantages of a strictly audio story is that your imagination is better than whatever production budget the BBC has.
Right.
Essentially. So that's good. All right. Anything else about the story before we move on?
No. I think we're doing great with it.
Yeah, I love this story a lot. Let's move into favorite lines. So, you have some favorite quotes from the story?
There are so many, but why
don't you give me one, and then we'll kind of alternate.
Yeah, the one that I wrote down, where the Doctor and Sarah have been brought to Chase. Scorby and his men are with them, and Chase is just going on and on and on. And he finally turns around and says, "You've heard of the theory that irregular light patterns can affect the sense of so-called mindless things." the doctor turns around, oh, like Scorby here. I still crack up when I hear that.
That's a good one.
That's the only one I wrote down, but there's that I could hear that 3 times in a row. I still crack up.
That is a great one. I like this one line from the doctor where he's ranting, trying to get everybody motivated to do something about this, about the crinoid, and he goes, if we don't find that pod before it germinates, it will be the end of everything. Everything, you understand? Even your pension.
Even your pension, yes. That's one of the best ones.
That's a great one. I like that one a lot. You got any more?
Not that I wrote down. There's
okay.
just there's so many just when watching it. You just catch them and then they're there.
Yeah, I have a few more. There's a great moment when they were at the Antarctica base, and Scorby and the doctor are kind of having a conversation, and Scorby's trying to interrogate the doctor. He goes, "Okay, start talking," and the doctor goes, "Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had perfect pitch," and Scorby cuts him off, and he's like, "The corpse," like he's pointing to the corpse. He goes, "What happened to him?" And then the doctor goes, "Who? Wolfgang Amadeus? Oh, him. Oh, he died."
He died.
It's like, yeah, thanks. I figured that out. So that was great. I like that a lot.
Yeah, a lot of them between the doctor and Scorby. He says he's this turnaround doctor, and he just completely does a 360. He doesn't even face him when he turns around.
That's one of the doctor's like private little joys is that he loves messing with people, or she.
Oh yeah.
And especially the fourth doctor. The fourth doctor loves to mess with people, especially guys threatening him. I think that's great. There's a line from the doctor where just as the armed guards are seizing him and Sarah, just after Chase, like they're trying to get out, and Chase comes across them, and the doctor goes, "That's right, grab us. We're very dangerous."
Right.
I thought that was pretty good. Harrison Chase and the doctor have a little brief moment where Harrison Chase says, "What do you do for an encore, doctor?" And the doctor replies as he's leaving, "I win."
I win, correct, yeah.
That's a good one. And then the doctor has a good line where he says, "A crinoid on the outside, a madman lurking inside. Not a happy situation." So that was a good one. I like that one too.
Yeah, there's so many good ones in the story.
It's a very clever script by Robert Banks Stewart, and not just atmospheric, but yeah, exactly, a lot of great lines. So
it's too bad he only wrote 2 stories though.
Yeah, it is. Seems like a lot of lost potential. But at least we got these 2, and he has a legacy. Like, well, hey, he introduced the Zygons, which were recently brought back during the Stephen Moffat era, and probably will be around now because of that. They weren't just a one-off monster as far as TV goes, which is great. So what's your rating for this story?
Well, I'm gonna have to go with 8 nitrogen injected crinoid seed pods out of 10. I would have said 9, but they travel in pairs.
Nice.
I wouldn't have 10 would have been a little stretch because of the way Unit was in the story.
Right.
So a solid 8 out of 10.
Excellent. That's perfectly acceptable. I think that's perfect. As for me, I was a little more generous because this is a bit of a sentimental favorite for me. I was going to go with stinging seed pods, but I'm not going to choose that because you took seed pods.
Gotcha.
Which is kind of obvious, granted. So I'm going to go with 9 out of 10 compost machines.
Ooh.
Because that compost machine really got a workout in this story.
Yes, it did. And I got to tell you, I was doing some grocery shopping the other day and driving through downtown Massillon. They had one of the trucks out, and they're cutting down some of the dead trees, and they had one of those, and that's all I could think of was the one in Chase's mansion. And when you see those logs go through there, it just turns them into mulch. I was like, oh.
Yeah, now
I got goosebumps.
Now, obviously, when Henderson gets put through there, you would expect blood on that compost machine, but because the BBC was already having problems with Mary White House back in the days, so they had to tone that down. Obviously, couldn't show blood.
Right.
but it's kind of implied. So you think there would be like a special, like one of the special features would be like, hey, we could put blood on the machine now.
Right.
Uh, with
But yeah, that's I thought the same thing with the ratings,
right,
uh, and Mary Whitehouse. Yeah, if they would have had that thing loaded up with blood after he went through, they'd probably be getting phone calls the very next day.
exactly. But but anyway, so yeah, obviously this is a sentimental favorite for me,
Hmm.
but I really enjoy the story a lot. I think it's really creepy, especially at the beginning, and it's a fun story with a lot of great villains, and Tom Baker and Sarah Jane. Can't go wrong
Hmm.
with it.
No, not at all.
All right.
It's been
So
interesting to see how Leela would have been with the story, but
yeah,
I'll take it with Sarah.
exactly. Now I do have, a reverse the polarity segment because hey,
Hmm.
we're not going back in time, we're going forward in time, so we're reversing the polarity once
Hmm.
again. So this is a little tricky because there aren't really plant monsters in the modern era.
Hmm.
So I decided to go with In the Forest of the Night,
Oh.
which is a rather not great Peter Capaldi era story.
Yeah, my O was just like Jamie's O when he's telling
Yes,
the doctor that his joke wasn't that funny.
yes, yes. But it does have plants in it, or trees,
Hmm.
as it turns out. So even though this isn't a great story, it does have a sort of connection here. This was the 10th episode from Series 8 in 2014, written by Frank Cottrell Boyce, who hopefully never writes for Doctor Who again.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Yes. Not one of my favorites, to say the least. But so I don't really recommend the story so much, but it kind of, I had to come up with something, right? So we
Hmm.
have, really quickly, Clara Oswald and Danny Pink chaperone several Coal Hill students on an overnight stay at the London Zoological Museum and wake up to find all of London and the rest of the world has been covered by large forests, you know, as it happens. After meeting up with the doctor, Danny finds a pile of student notebooks aboard the TARDIS that Clara had accidentally left behind. And among the notebooks is the student Mabs. And each page has a picture of an angry sun striking down trees. Interestingly enough, Claire explains that after the disappearance of her sister Annabelle, Meb had exhibited strange tics and heard voices in her head, and has been on medication to calm the effects. When Meb wanders off, the doctor and Clara set off to find her, shortly followed by Danny and the other students. The doctor explains that he believes a giant solar flare, similar to the one that destroyed the Bank of Karabraxos in Time Heist, is due to strike Earth that day, and Meb is central to the appearance of the trees, somehow. All right, so
Hmm.
they find Meb safe, but as the last of Meb's medication wears off, the doctor examines her movements and thinks she might be communicating with something. So this is the connection, kind of like the Krynoid was communicating with Chase a little bit.
Right.
That's what I was going with. Um, However horrible this story is, and the doctor temporarily creates a gravity field around Meb, revealing a number of glowing bug-like creatures. They speak through Meb and explaining that they have been on Earth since the dawn of the growing of time, and were called to Meb after the disappearance of her sister. They claim responsibility for growing the forest, as they had done before in the north and the south. The doctor dispels the field when he finds the creatures are in pain because of it. The doctor mulls this over and regrettably believes that Earth is doomed, like seeds of doom, and from the solar flare, and offers to take Clara, Danny, and the other students safely away. Sucks to be everybody else. Clara and Danny agree to stay on Earth with the students, and Clara tells the doctor he should escape on his own, given how many times he saved the planet in the past. After being inspired, though, the doctor tells Clara that the creatures were referring to the Tunguska effect and the Kuraka impact, events that should have been catastrophic for life on Earth. The doctor believes that the trees were created to buffer the effects of the solar flare, somehow because, hey, trees don't burn or anything. I'm not quite sure about the science of this, to say the
Every
least.
series needs a stinker.
And this is it. And this is Series 8's. And this is after Kill the Moon, just saying.
Yeah.
So that says a lot. So Dana reports that the world government's unable to burn down the trees due to their ability to control oxygen near them, are planning on using defoliating agents on the trees, kind of like UNIT was doing in the greenhouse inside Chase's manor. This would apparently render them unable to stop the solar flare. The Doctor hacks into the global cellular network, and Meb reads off a message prepared by the other students to warn the governments that this is a really bad idea, which they stop in time. As Clara and Danny escort the children home, Danny tells Clara that he knows she lied to him about her travels with the Doctor, but forgives her and allows their relationship to grow. How nice. Until, of course, he gets hit by a car. Later, the Doctor and Clara watch in orbit from the safety of the TARDIS as the solar flare harmlessly strikes the Earth somehow through magic, because hey, it's a fairy tale.
And just wave your hands in the air.
Exactly. Clap your hands, everybody, and everything will be okay. The Doctor returns Clara to Earth as the trees start to dissipate and explains that humanity will forget about the sudden appearance of the trees as they have from past events, even though, hey, there's this thing called the internet. And, you know,
trees are everywhere, but we're going to forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. Have you been on the internet lately? Anything on the internet is forever. So, but apparently the memory will linger as part of fairy tales because Stephen Moffat loves fairy tales and thinks Doctor Who is a fairy tale. So that's In the Forest of the Night.
It's a good reverse polarity.
I had to struggle with this one.
Yeah, but if you want more crinoids though, the Hot House is fantastic.
Yes, that's a much better recommendation. Hot House.
Yeah, with the crinoids being such a visual monster, they pull it off in that story, and I listened to it a few days ago just preparing for today, and even though you can't see them, the sound effects are great. The narrations are perfect. I mean, you feel that you're there with them, and they did a really nice job. Plus, it's more like an unofficial sequel too.
Right.
And now the Big Finish is canon. They mentioned the World Ecology Bureau. They mentioned Sir Colin Thackeray. And the characters, even though they're not there in the story, they are mentioned. Yeah. And it just takes place. I want to say about 10, 15 years afterwards or so. Yeah, apparently Sir Colin took cuttings off the crinoid from the Chase estate.
Great plan.
When he was supposed to burn the whole thing. Yeah, exactly.
Great idea.
That's what Paul McGann's Doctor says too. It's like, what? Yeah. You do the exact opposite of what I told you to do. But yeah, it's a great follow-up.
Yeah, and it's been a while since I've listened to the story, but as I remember it, it was a great story. So, So don't watch In the Forest of the Night. Go ahead and track down Hot House. You can go to bigfinish.com. And you'll be much happier that way. Trust me.
It's readily available too. You can pick it up either there or on Amazon. They've got it.
Yeah, or Who North America. Definitely recommend it as well. All right. So we have some feedback. First and foremost, from Holly from Wisconsin, writes in once again about the Seeds of Doom. She goes, "Hey all, Seeds of Doom. It's been a while since I've seen this one, and it's still enjoyable. A Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane adventure. The crinoids are an interesting creature, almost half seaweeds / swamp thing. Love the Doctor's line that nothing is hopeless. The ending of the second episode to head into the third, talk about explosive, pun intended. Nothing like talking about pretty much the whole base. Let's see, the Doctor and Sarah Jane being duped by the Department of Ecology guys. At least they were able to duck or to escape unscathed. The Ducat Dukas had me chuckling when the Doctor and Sarah Jane go to visit the artist of the painting they found. The Doctor can pull off a chauffeur in disguise very well." So a lot of random thoughts here. Poor Keeler getting attacked by the pod, and I guess good help is so hard to find. Well, especially when you don't bother looking for it, right?
Right.
What to say about Scorby? He makes the interesting villain / henchman. Mr. Chase shouldn't count all his chickens before they hatch, or be so sure his plan is going to go according to plan. The doctor is on to you. Ducat, excuse me, showing up to get paid, I didn't see coming, and her being able to talk her way past Scorby to get help for Sarah Jane and the doctor.
Operation Nuthouse.
Exactly, Operation Nuthouse.
That's great.
That was a good one. That was a good line. I almost put that in there. Things are getting serious when Unit gets name dropped to come in and help out. Chase meeting up again with the transformed Keeler isn't going to end well. No kidding. The Crinoids are about as bad/deadly as the Autons. And that's up there. I think they had potential.
Yeah, you figure they can control plant life. The Autons can control plastic. So.
Yeah. That's a pretty good comparison. I think that's
That'd
fair.
Be a heck of a tag team.
Yeah, exactly. So there you go. There's your Doctor Who story idea.
Right.
The Autons team up with the Chronoids. Let's have that. Let's make that happen. Okay, I'll write it. The Doctor trying to save Chase but not succeeding felt right, and then Unit coming in with the planes to get rid of the Chronoid was nice. The ending with the TARDIS taking them where they need to be instead of where they wanted. I'll wrap it up here. Holly from Wisconsin. Thank you, Holly. Always fun to hear from you. And then, of course, we had Paul from Australia writing in about the Seeds of Doom. Paul says, "Hi, Charles and John." So, hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Nice of you to give John a little shout out here. I have to start with saying that, just like Charles, this story was really my entry point to my lifelong love of Doctor Who. A lot of people were into this, like noticed the story right off the bat. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Australia, Who was broadcast on the ABC network at 6 p.m. weeknights in the 70s and 80s, which I would watch eagerly after school. Sure, I had seen some episodes of previous Doctors growing up, but this was the story that hooked me. So, cheers, Paul. We're right there in the same boat.
Absolutely.
The story is really a cross between Day of the Triffids and The Thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the Doctor is unusually aggressive in these episodes, what with punching people out and such. Yes, he is. We talked about that. There is definitely a lot of body horror, too, with mutating human flesh and people being turned into garden mulch via a huge composter. Yeah, we talked about that as well. So, yeah, it's a good body horror story. The villains are great, referring to Scorby and Chase. They both give the Doctor and Sarah plenty of trouble. You even have Unit, but sadly without the Brigadier. Frowny face emoji. Just love watching any episode with Tom and Elisabeth in it. Smiley face emoji. Sending you both my kindest regards, Paul. Okay, P.S. I am so looking forward to the next show, which I suspect will have a giant rat in the story. And maybe a strange pig creature too. Maybe. So what Paul is nicely setting me up for is, next time on Next Up Everywhere, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, but next time on Next Up Everywhere, we're going to talk The Talons of Wang Chiang, the rather controversial story from the
controversial, but it is a classic.
But it is a classic, and it's so fun to watch Tom Baker as Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and Leela's great in it. We get the introduction, of course, of Henry Gordon Jago and Professor George Lightfoot in this story, which is a great pairing that Big Finish appreciated enough to bring back in their own audio adventure series.
They brought back their own series, yeah.
And, of course, the guy, Christopher Benjamin, who played Henry Gordon Jago, played several roles in Doctor Who, which, of course, we're going to talk about next time. But Jesse Jackson's going to return, of course, my partner in time, and we're going to talk about that. So, and yes, we will address the rather dubious controversy of having a white person being made up to play an Asian person in this story.
Now, Jesse doesn't like six-part stories, too.
No, he doesn't. I was really surprised he suggested this one.
That's why
I had to warn him.
This.
I actually warned him before we started talking here, John, because we talked earlier today when we recorded Titan Talk, and I was like, you know that Talons is a 6-part story, right? And he goes, yeah, I know. So I said, break it up into chunks. So watch the first 3 episodes, take a break, and watch the second 3. It'll flow a lot better.
Yeah, that's why I was happy I had this one, because I was like, okay, this is one six-parter Jesse doesn't even have to worry about.
Exactly. So that's good. So I appreciate you, John. You did a great job of saving Jesse from talking about another
Another six-part adventure.
Exactly. Exactly. All
You're
right.
welcome,
So
Jesse.
there's your major contribution right there. You saved Jesse from another six-parter. That's awesome. All right. So with that in mind, if you want to be like Holly and Paul, and please do, if you want to reach us here at Next Stop Everywhere, you can reach us at nextstopeverywheresmg@gmail.com. That's nextstopeverywheresmg, the SMG, of course, for Southgate Media Group. And that's at gmail.com. So please write to us there, especially if, hey, you want to be like John, be one of the cool kids that appeared on Next Stop Everywhere. You can reach us there, or you can reach us at Next Stop SMG on the Twitter machine, or on our Facebook page, of course, Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who Podcast. And while you're at it, why don't you go to our Instagram page, Next Stop Everywhere Podcast on Instagram, and please like and follow us there as well. Please check that out. I just posted recently on that page. I was trying to give it a little life to it, so I posted a picture from when I went to go see Logopolis, the screening of Tom Baker's final story.
Nice.
And one of my favorites, because of course it regenerates into Peter Davison, my favorite Doctor, at the end of the story. So, and introduces Tegan and features Nyssa becoming a companion, and hey, you got the Master and Adric as well. So, so very cool story. Had a lot of fun with that. So I thought if you want to check that out, please go to our Instagram. So John, this is your big moment. Why don't you, if you got anything you want to shamelessly plug, like, the Ohio Type 40, why don't you, go ahead and do that?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. The Ohio Type 40, we're one of the 4 main big Who groups in the state. You don't have to be from Ohio to like our page. We have friends from overseas. We have friends from all over the country. I've found that getting older as a fan, we don't have a whole lot of time to be getting together, but we do have little get-togethers for some of the local fans. A lot of times it's just either a barbecue or a cookout, but we'll just get together, watch some Doctor Who, and have some fun. So yeah, we're on Facebook, the Ohio Type 40. Haven't really gone off apart from any other social media for it, but got about 175 likes so far. So
excellent.
Come on by and like the page.
Yeah, everybody check that out, please, and give John and the group some likes, and get in touch, because John's obviously awesome. He was kind enough to help us out here, and why don't you show him some love right back?
It'd be great.
I definitely appreciate it. As a personal favor to me. All right. So as for me, of course, I'm at Charles Skaggs on the Twitter machine, at Charles Skaggs on the Instagram. Facebook, of course, Charles Skaggs in Hilliard, Ohio, or my blog at Geeky Things, if I can get the thing to work.
Damn good coffee and hot.
Damn good coffee and hot, where I talk about all the things we talk about here on Next Stop Everywhere. Doctor Who, any kind of Torchwood, Sarah Jane adventures, all kinds of comic book sci-fi news, and news of my other podcasts they do for Southgate Media Group, including Titan Talk, the Titans podcast they do with Jesse, where currently we're watching the series Doom Patrol that's currently airing on DC Universe, which is a lot of fun and a very cool show, and Jesse's a lot of fun on that pot. So if you like us here, you might want to check us out there for Titan Talk, especially if you're a DC fan, or you just like good, weird science fiction superhero shows. Just like Doctor Who, almost. Right up your alley. Otherwise, you can reach me check me out on Ghostwood, the Twin Peaks podcast that I do with Zan Sprouse, wife of comic book artist Chris Sprouse. We're going to talk about all things Twin Peaks, David Lynch, etc., etc. Please check that out as well. I would definitely appreciate that. And that's about it, I guess. So, John, did you have fun, I hope?
I had a great time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and you did great, and you're welcome back anytime you want to come on. You want to talk some more Doctor Who, we'd love to have you back. thank you so much for talking this story with me. It's one of my all-time favorites, especially from the Tom Baker era, and had a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
I did too. Thank you very much. Like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to help you guys out.
Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hope you keep enjoying the show.
Yep.
And I guess that's about it, really. But thank you so much, and we'll definitely check you out on Facebook.
Sounds great. Appreciate it.
Sounds good. Okay, so everybody, come on back next time. We're going to talk the talons of Wang Chiang. So it's going to be a really interesting discussion, to say the least.
I can't wait to hear it.
We've got giant rats. We've got, slightly racist stuff going on. We've got some,
right there.
Exactly. There's Lee Sen Chang right there on his mug. That's awesome.
Palace Theater.
And very cool. But we got the Jago and Lightfoot. And, of course, the fourth Doctor is Sherlock Holmes, practically. And Leela. So check that out. It's going to be a lot of fun. So come on back. And Jesse Jackson's back. And we'll see you next time right here on Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye, everybody.
Take care.